These deleted Stranger Things scenes will completely change the way you look at Stranger Things, from disturbing deaths to disgusting monster mutations. Today, I'll be showing you all the horrifying scenes that got deleted from Stranger Things, starting with a dark one, Max's permanent death. Max Mayfield was actually supposed to permanently die at the end of season 4, without any chance of revival or recovery. The Duffer Brothers originally planned for her death to be completely final, with no 11 revival attempt whatsoever. This alternate ending would have emphasized themes of irreversible loss and made season 4 conclude with genuine tragedy rather than hope for recovery in future seasons. But what was Netflix's actual plan with this? The original season 4 finale featured Max dying from Vecna's attack with no comatose state or potential for healing. Her death scene would have been brutal and permanent, showing her bones snapping and eyes bleeding out like other Vecna victims, before she simply expired in Lucas's arms. No supernatural intervention would save her, and no medical technology would keep her alive artificially. The Duffer Brothers intended this to mirror real-world tragedies where people don't get miraculous second chances. Not gonna lie, I would have turned the show off if this happened. Max would have stayed dead with her body buried and her story permanently concluded, making Lucas and the entire group process genuine grief and loss. The death would have demonstrated that even main characters aren't safe from Vecna's power, and that some battles end in complete defeat rather than heroic victories. Ultimately, the writers decided this ending was too nihilistic and opted for her comatose state to preserve hope for season 5. But this wasn't the only character death they had planned. Enzo's death. Dmitri, the Russian guard who helped Hopper escape from Kamchatka prison, was originally slated for death in season 4, potentially mirroring Alexei's tragic demise from season 3. His planned death would have eliminated another good guy Russian character and avoided repetition in the show's character archetypes. The Duffer Brothers considered killing him to reinforce that helping Americans during the Cold War had deadly consequences for Soviet citizens who chose conscience over country. Enzo's death scene would have involved him being caught by other Russian forces while helping Hopper, Joyce, and Murray escape from the prison facility. His sacrifice would have been designed to give the main characters crucial time to flee while he faced execution by his former comrades for treason against the Soviet state. The scene was meant to show the brutal reality of defecting from an authoritarian system where betrayal meant death. His execution would have been quick and merciless, showing no mercy for traitors. Dimitri's actual death would have been him getting shot by firing squad or beaten to death by prison guards, dying as a direct result of his choice to value human decency over political loyalty. His death would have served as another reminder that good deeds in the Stranger Things universe often lead to fatal consequences, especially for supporting characters who aren't part of the core group. The writers ultimately spared Enzo to avoid repeating Alexei's storyline and to hint at future Russian plotlines, but Eddie's fate was never negotiable. Eddie's death. Even if Eddie Munson had survived the Demobat attack in season 4, the Duffer Brothers revealed on the Happy Sad Confused podcast that he was always destined to die regardless of the circumstances. His character arc as a doomed character meant that surviving the Upside Down would only lead to imprisonment and eventual death, as 1980s Hawkins authorities would never accept supernatural explanations for the ritual murders pinned on him. Eddie's fate represented societal scapegoating and the impossibility of redemption for social outcasts during the Satanic Panic era. The alternate survival scenario would have featured Eddie making it out of the Upside Down alive, but immediately facing arrest and prosecution for the murders of Chrissy Cunningham and the other Vecna victims. His metalhead appearance, association with Dungeons and Dragons, and leadership of the Hellfire Club would have made him the perfect target for 1980s moral panic about devil worship. No jury would believe his supernatural defense, and his unconventional lifestyle would be used as evidence of his guilt. Eddie would have been sentenced to death or life imprisonment for crimes he didn't even commit, dying in prison or the electric chair rather than as a hero saving Dustin. His survival would have only prolonged his suffering and demonstrated how society systematically destroys people who don't conform to mainstream expectations about appearance and interests. Rest in peace, Eddie. The Duffer Brothers chose heroic death over prolonged injustice, but their original creature designs would have made his demise even more gruesome. Demobat lethality. The Demobats were originally designed to be far more lethal and gruesome in their attacks on human victims, with early concept art showing serrated tail tentacles, specifically designed to wrap around and cut flesh. These deadly appendages would have potentially killed Steve during his strangulation scene in the Upside Down, turning what became a survivable encounter into a fatal mauling. Another grotesque iteration featured the creatures' heads and bodies splitting open horizontally, evoking imagery of demodogs while being more visceral and disturbing for viewers. The more violent Demobat design would have involved cutting implements that sliced victims while restraining them, causing severe lacerations and rapid blood loss during attacks. Steve's underwater encounter would have featured actual flesh being torn away from his torso and limbs, rather than just superficial scratching and biting. The serrated tentacles would have functioned like organic razor wire, making escape nearly nearly impossible while inflicting maximum damage. The splitting head design drew inspiration from Star Wars Mynock bats, but with added body horror elements. Steve would have suffered potentially fatal wounds from the enhanced tentacles, requiring immediate medical intervention to survive the blood loss and organ damage. His rescue by Nancy, Robin, and Eddie would have been a desperate race against time to prevent him from bleeding out in the Upside Down. The attack would have established Dima bats as genuinely lethal rather than merely threatening. The production team toned down these designs to avoid excessive gore while maintaining the creature's menace. But Vecna's domain had even more disturbing variations. Vecna's Twisted Lair variants. Vecna's Mind Lair had multiple horrifying design variants that were scrapped for being too psychologically disturbing and overwhelming for audiences. One terrifying version featured a large vortex with dissolving house fragments and swirling spires containing rotting victims suspended in air, with everything in constant circular motion creating a nauseating effect. Another blood-soaked variant showed spaces where Vecna would drag victims to massive stone structures, inspired by Zdzisław Beksinski's dystopian surrealism and the cell's mind-entering scenes, emphasizing ritual sacrifice and body horror. The vortex design would have shown previous victims decomposing corpses, trapped within the swirling psychic architecture, with their bodies in various stages of decay floating past Max during her mental battle. Viewers would have witnessed dozens of rotting remains spinning endlessly in Vecna's domain, creating a visual representation of his decades-long killing spree. The blood-soaked variant featured slimy webs of vines suspending 3 victims over an altar, with a 4th being dragged toward ritualistic stone structures covered in gore. Max would have been forced to navigate through this charnel house of decaying bodies while fighting for her mental freedom, witnessing the fates of everyone who had failed Vecna's tests before her. The lair would have felt more like a supernatural mass grave than a psychological battleground, emphasizing death and hopelessness over the possibility of escape. The final design chose a less viscerally disturbing yellowish-orange hue over these darker concepts that emphasize decay and ritual murder. Fred's body horror vision. Fred Benson's hallucination sequence involving the car crash victim was originally much more gruesome, featuring explicit body mutation and graphic transformation that was significantly toned down to maintain creepiness without excessive gore. The original concept showed the girl's finger extending grotesquely into a Vecna-like claw, while tentacles burst, accompanied by blood streaming from her eyes as she maintained disturbing eye contact with Fred throughout the metamorphosis. Fred's vision would have included watching the crash victim's body transform in real time, with her finger bones elongating and skin stretching to accommodate the signature Vecna claw structure. Multiple tentacles would have erupted through her flesh, tearing open wounds along her arm that bled profusely while she remained conscious and aware. Her eyes would have hemorrhaged continuously, creating bloody tears that contrasted with her otherwise normal facial expression and voice. The transformation sequence would have been a visceral display of Vecna's influence, literally reshaping human anatomy, demonstrating how his curse doesn't just kill but corrupts and mutates its victims. Fred would have watched in mounting horror as someone who appeared normal revealed themselves to be something monstrous, questioning the nature of reality around him. The writers significantly reduced these graphic elements to suggest supernatural horror through implication rather than showing explicit body mutilation and gore. Young Henry's Fall. A scrapped concept art piece showed a point-of-view shot from the hellscape as Eleven sends Henry one through the interdimensional tear, described as a beautiful but unused perspective that would have provided immersive horror. This first-person view would have put audiences directly in Henry's position as he fell through the dimensional barrier, experiencing his transformation from human to monster from his own terrifying perspective, rather than watching it happen to him from outside. The POV sequence would have shown the interdimensional tear opening above viewers, with Eleven visible through the portal as Henry plummeted toward the hellish landscape below. The camera would have spun and tumbled during the fall, giving audiences a visceral sense of disorientation and helplessness. Lightning would have crackled around the frame while the upside-down spores and ash filled the view, creating an overwhelming sensory experience. Henry's landing and subsequent transformation into Vecna would have been shown through his own eyes, letting audiences experience his pain and mutation firsthand as his body twisted into its monstrous form. The sequence would have created uncomfortable empathy for the villain while showing the true horror of dimensional banishment. The concept was ultimately deemed too immersive and potentially overwhelming for viewers, though it remained a visually striking, unused idea. Particle extraction horror. The Mind Flayer's creation process originally involved Henry Creel extracting particles from floating boulders scattered throughout the hellscape, with early concepts depicting him as an anti-gravity force causing rocks and debris to fall upwards in defiance of physics. This visceral extraction method was abandoned as too complex and potentially confusing for viewers to understand, though it would have provided a more graphic origin for the shadow monster that terrorized Hawkins. The original creation sequence would have shown Henry physically manipulating matter throughout the Upside Down, using his telekinetic powers to tear apart the environment's very fabric. Massive boulders would have cracked and dissolved as Henry forcibly extracted their essential particles, reassembling them into the spider spider-like form that became the Mind Flayer. The process would have been visually disturbing, showing environmental destruction on a massive scale as reality bent to Henry's will. The Mind Flayer would have literally emerged from this violent deconstruction of the hellscape itself, built from the landscape's suffering and destruction rather than pre-existing materials. Henry's anti-gravity manipulation would have created deeply unsettling visuals of normal physics being completely reversed, with debris floating upward while Henry